Morning, I looked out my kitchen window and saw the snow. I almost didn't notice it. We'd had a light dusting overnight, maybe 2 inches, nothing unusual for January in central Ohio. The kind of snow that settles quietly on everything and makes the world look peaceful. My driveway, the side yard, the old wooden gate that leads out to the back where I keep the firewood stacked. But something was wrong. There were tire tracks cutting through the snow along the side of the house, wide ones. Not from my truck. My truck hadn't moved in 2 days. And boot prints. 2 sets, maybe 3, leading from the gate around toward the basement window on the north side of the house. I stood there, in my socks holding a coffee mug I forgot to drink from, and the cold coming off the glass hit my face, and I thought she told me not to shovel. That's what the woman at the pharmacy had said to me 4 days earlier. She'd gripped my forearm with both hands. This small woman I had never met before in my life. And she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Whatever you do, don't shovel the snow off your driveway or your side yard. Not until you've had a good long look at it first." I remember thinking it was the strangest thing anyone had ever said to me. I almost laughed. I was 63 years old. I'd been shoveling my own driveway since before this woman was probably born, and here she was telling me to leave it alone. But I didn't laugh. Something in her face stopped me. And now, standing at my kitchen window at 7 in the morning with tire tracks in my snow that I hadn't put there, I understood why. Let me back up, because to understand what was happening that January, you have to understand what my life looked like in the year before it. I retired at 61 from 32 years working maintenance and facilities management for the county school district. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and I was good at it. And when I walked out of that building for the last time, I had a decent pension, a paid-off house in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, and what I thought was a pretty solid plan for the years ahead. My wife, Lorraine, had passed 4 years earlier. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, gone within 14 months. That kind of loss changes everything about how you see your life. You stop taking the long view and start paying attention to what's right in front of you. What was right in front of me was my son. My son, I'll call him by his name, which is Cody, was 34 at the time all of this started. He'd had a rough stretch in his late 20s. Some bad decisions. A relationship that fell apart badly. A period where he was drinking more than he should have been. I'd watched all of it from a distance. Tried to be there without hovering. Tried to help without enabling. It's a hard balance. Any parent who's been through something similar knows exactly how hard that balance is. By the time he was 32, he seemed to have turned it around. He was in a new relationship. A woman named Brianna, and she seemed steady, practical, good for him. He had a job in logistics, nothing spectacular but consistent. He was calling me more regularly, coming by for dinner every couple of weeks. We'd started watching football together on Sundays sometimes, just the two of us sitting in the living room like we used to when he was a teenager. I was happy, genuinely happy. After everything with Lorraine, after the years of watching Cody struggle, it felt like the ground was finally solid under my feet again. Then, around March of the year before that January, things started to shift. It started with money. Cody called me one evening, not a Sunday, not our usual rhythm, and he sounded stressed. He said he and Brianna were looking at a place, a rental, something with more space because they were thinking about starting a family, and the deposit was more than they'd expected, and could I help bridge the gap, just for a few weeks, until his next paycheck cycle caught up? $800. I said yes without hesitating. Of course I did. This was my son, talking about building a future, starting a family. I sent him the money that same evening through Zelle. A few weeks became a month. The month passed and nothing came back, and I didn't bring it up because I didn't want to make him feel bad about it. He was working on it, I told myself. Things like that take time. Then in May, he called again. This time it was for his car. Something with the transmission, he said. The mechanic's estimate was $1,400, and he'd already put it in the shop because he needed it for work, and he was sorry to ask. He knew it was a lot, but he was in a tough spot. I wired him the $1,400. I want to be clear about something. I was not a naive man. I had 63 years of life experience. I had managed budgets and contracts and personnel for decades. I was not someone who fell for things easily. But this was my son. That's the thing people who haven't been through this don't understand. It's not about being smart or not smart. It's about the specific blind spot that opens up inside you when you love someone. I looked at Cody and I saw the little boy who used to fall asleep on the couch watching the late game, and I saw the young man who cried at his mother's funeral and couldn't stop shaking. And those images made it almost impossible to see clearly what was right in front of me. By September, I had given him just over $11,000 across 7 or 8 separate requests. Each one had a reason. Each reason sounded plausible. And each time I asked when things might stabilize, he had an answer that made sense in the moment. In October, my neighbor, a retired school teacher who'd lived 2 doors down from me for 15 years, said something that stayed with me. We were raking leaves in our respective yards, and she called over the fence and said, "I've been seeing your son's car here a lot at odd hours. You doing okay over there?" She said it carefully, the way you say something when you've been trying to figure out how to say it for a while. I told her things were fine. But after I went inside, I sat down at the kitchen table, and I looked at my bank statements for the first time in several months with clear eyes. And I did the math. $11,240, plus the $800 for March. $12,040 total, in 7 months. That number sat on the table in front of me like something physical. My pension brought in about $2,800 a month after taxes. I had savings. Lorraine and I had been careful people. We'd saved our whole lives. But they weren't unlimited. And $12,000 in 7 months was not bridge money. That was not a son having a rough patch. That was something else. I didn't call Cody that night. I needed to think. I have a prescription I pick up every month. Blood pressure medication, nothing serious. Just something I've been managing since my mid-50s. The pharmacy I use is a small independent one about 1.5 miles from my house. I've been going there for years. The pharmacist knows my name, knows my prescriptions, and we usually talk for a few minutes when I come in. The first week of December, I went to pick up my monthly prescription. It was a Tuesday afternoon, cold, the kind of gray Ohio December day where the light never really gets going. There was a woman ahead of me in line, older than me by maybe 10 or 15 years, late 70s, I guess. Small and neatly dressed, the kind of woman who still wore a proper coat with buttons rather than a zip-up. She was going through her wallet with some difficulty, and I could see by the way her shoulders had dropped that the number she'd just heard from the pharmacist was not what she was expecting. She counted out what she had in cash, then counted it again, then looked up and apologized to the pharmacist and said she'd have to come back. I don't know exactly why I did what I did. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I wasn't thinking about anything except that she needed her medication, and I had it in my account. I told the pharmacist to add it to my transaction. The woman looked at me like I'd said something impossible. I told her it was no trouble. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and took my forearm in both of her small hands, and she looked at me very directly. Not the way people look at you when they're being polite, but the way people look at you when they're being polite, but the way people look at you when they actually see you. And she said, "I need to tell you something." I thought she was going to thank me. Instead, she said, "I live on Glendon Street, 2 blocks from you. I've seen things I think you need to know about." I didn't understand what she meant. She said she'd seen a car at my house, late at night, parking without headlights on the side street that runs along my property. She'd seen it several times over the past few weeks. She said the people in the car sat there for a while, sometimes got out and walked around the perimeter of my house, then left. I felt something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the December air. She said she didn't know what they were doing or who they were, and she couldn't prove anything, and she thought about calling the police, but she wasn't sure she'd seen enough to make a report. But she felt I should know. Then she said, and this is the part I couldn't make sense of at the time, "Whatever you do, don't shovel the snow off your driveway or your side yard, not until you've had a good long look at it first." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Snow remembers everything that walks through it. Don't erase it before you've read it." Then she thanked me again, buttoned her coat, and walked out. I stood at the pharmacy counter for probably 15 seconds just processing what had happened. The pharmacist looked at me and asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. I paid for my prescription and drove home and sat in my driveway for a long time before I went inside. That night, I called my son. He sounded normal, relaxed almost. He asked how I was doing, mentioned something about Brianna, said work was going fine. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, and nothing he said gave anything away. But there was one moment, where I asked him, just casually, whether he'd been out our way recently, and he said he hadn't, not since the Sunday 2 weeks ago. I said okay. I didn't push it. After we hung up, I went to the window in my front bedroom, the one that looks out over the side street, and I sat in the dark for a while. Nothing that night. Over the next 3 days, I went about my normal routine. Grocery shopping, a doctor's appointment, a few hours at the library. The snow the forecasters had been talking about came on a Thursday. Not heavy, about 2 inches overnight, exactly as predicted. I woke up Friday morning and my first instinct, out of 30 years of habit, was to put on my boots and grab the shovel. I stopped with my hand on the door handle. Don't shovel the snow off your driveway or your side yard, not until you've had a good long look at it first. I looked out the window instead, and that's when I saw them, the tire tracks along the side of the house, 2 sets of boot prints leading from the gate toward the basement window on the north side. The boot prints didn't go back the same way. They went around the corner toward the back of the house and didn't come back into view. I stood at that window for a long time. Then I went and got my phone, and I took photographs of everything. Every track, every print, every disturbed patch of snow. I walked outside in my slippers, I know, and I followed the trail around back without stepping on anything. The boot prints led to the basement window. The window was closed and locked, same as I left it. But I could see where someone had tried to work the frame. There were faint scratches on the painted wood around the latch. I went back inside, and I called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's office, and I told them what I'd found. 2 deputies came out about an hour later. They walked the perimeter with me, photographed what I'd photographed, and one of them, a young woman who looked about 25 and was very calm and methodical about the whole thing, asked me whether I had any idea who might have done this. I told her about the woman at the pharmacy. I told her what she'd said about the car parking on the side street. The deputy took notes without reacting, which I respected. Then she asked whether I had any family members who might have a reason to want access to my home. That's when I said my son's name. What happened next did not happen quickly. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect this kind of story to have a clean, fast resolution, and life is rarely like that. The sheriff's office opened a preliminary inquiry. Over the following 2 weeks, I learned things I'm still not entirely comfortable knowing. Cody had taken out a payday loan in November, a substantial one, at a rate that was essentially predatory, using my home address on the application. He'd also, I discovered through my own bank after I started asking questions I should have asked months earlier, attempted to add himself as a joint account holder on one of my savings accounts using documentation that was not accurate. The bank had flagged it and not processed it, but they hadn't notified me, which is a separate conversation I had with the branch manager that I will leave out of this for the sake of length. Brianna, it turned out, had a prior fraud-related civil judgment in her name from a previous state. I don't know exactly what Cody knew and didn't know about that. I'm not sure I'll ever know. The people at my house that night, the ones who left those tracks in the snow, were never conclusively identified. The sheriff's office believed, based on the loan documentation using my address, that someone may have been attempting to assess what was on the property. Beyond that, I don't know. The investigation didn't lead to charges. What it did lead to was a conversation with my son that I had been dreading for months. I asked him to come over. I didn't tell him why. He showed up on a Sunday, our usual time, and he sat across from me at the kitchen table, and at first he tried to play it normally, talking about nothing, asking if I had coffee going. I put the bank statements on the table. I put the photographs of the snow on the table. I put the copy of the flagged account application on the table. He went very quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I'm 63 years old and I spent 32 years managing crises calmly, and I was not going to lose that now. Not with my own son, not at my own kitchen table. I told him what I knew. I told him what the deputies had told me. I told him that I had spoken to an attorney, which I had the week before, and that any further financial manipulation using my name, my address, or my accounts would be addressed legally, not personally. Cody started to explain. The words came out rehearsed, and then when the rehearsed words ran out, what replaced them was something more honest and much harder to hear. He was in real trouble. Real financial trouble. The kind that comes from bad choices compounded over time and then handed to someone else who doesn't have better options. He had believed, or told himself he believed, that I would never actually be hurt by any of it, that things would get resolved before anything got too serious. I asked him if he knew about the people who came to my house. He said he didn't. He said he swore he didn't. I'm still not sure whether I believe him. I told him he needed to leave. I told him I loved him, and that I hoped he would find his way to something better, and I meant both of those things completely. And then I asked him to go. He sat there for a moment. Then he stood up, and he said he was sorry. He didn't look at me when he said it. He drove away, and I stood at the front window and watched his car until I couldn't see it anymore. I went back to the pharmacy the following week. I'd been thinking about the woman the whole time. Everything that had unfolded, the photographs, the inquiry, the conversation with my son, all of it had started because she saw something and chose to say something to a stranger in a checkout line. I asked the pharmacist if she knew who she was. He thought about it and said there was a woman in her late 70s who came in occasionally, lived nearby, very quiet. He didn't know her name offhand, but he'd seen her before. I left my number with him and asked him to pass it along if she came in again. About 3 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was her. Her name was Virginia. She'd lived on Glendon Street for 41 years. Her husband had passed 7 years ago. She said she'd been watching my house for a couple of weeks before she finally worked up the nerve to say something, and she wasn't sure she'd done the right thing until I called. I told her she'd done exactly the right thing. We talked for almost an hour that first call. She was sharp and funny and had opinions about everything, which I appreciated. She'd grown up in West Virginia, moved to Columbus when she married, never went back except for funerals. She'd been a bookkeeper for a plumbing supply company for most of her working life. I asked her about the snow, about why she said what she said. She told me her father used to say it. He'd been a farmer, and he'd said that the first snow of the season told you everything you needed to know about what your property had been doing while you weren't watching. She'd never had particular reason to apply it to anything before, but when she saw those tracks night after night and she saw me at the pharmacy, she thought of her father's words. I didn't know if it would mean anything, she said. I just knew I had to say something. That was 14 months ago now. Cody and I have not had contact in that time. That is not something I say with satisfaction. It is simply the reality of where we are. I've spoken with a counselor about it. Something I resisted for a long time and then finally stopped resisting. And she has helped me understand that what I'm feeling is grief. Because it is. You can grieve someone who is still alive. You can mourn the version of a relationship you thought you had. The financial situation is something I've largely sorted out with my attorney's help. The savings account issue was resolved. I've updated my estate documents. I've put appropriate safeguards in place that I should have had years ago. The people who left tracks in my snow were never identified. I've made my peace with that, more or less. What I haven't made my peace with, and probably never will entirely, is the question of how I missed it for so long. $12,000. 7 months. All those conversations that seem normal. A man who spent 32 years catching problems before they became crises, and I couldn't see this one standing right in front of me in my own house. I don't have a clean answer for that. I think love operates on a different logic than everything else. I think it has to, or we'd all stop doing it. Virginia and I have coffee about once a month at the diner on Morse Road. She orders the same thing every time, black coffee and a slice of whatever pie they have that day, and she talks about her grandchildren and her garden and the neighborhood, and I mostly listen, which is probably what I need more than anything else. She still lives 2 blocks away. She still walks past my house sometimes on her evening rounds. The snow came again last week. First real snow of the season, about 3 inches, quiet and even. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at it for a good long time before I went to get the shovel. And I thought about a small woman in a pharmacy who took my arm in both of her hands and saw me clearly when I was not seeing myself at all, and who gave me something I didn't know how to ask for and couldn't have found on my own. I thought about how the ground, when you let it, tells you the truth. I keep coming back to that moment at the pharmacy counter, not the part where I handed over my card. That part took about 4 seconds and required nothing from me. The part I keep returning to is what Virginia did next. She didn't have to say a word. She could have thanked me and walked out, and that would have been the end of it. A small, forgettable kindness between strangers on a gray Tuesday in December. Instead, she turned around and told the truth to someone she'd never met about something that was going to be painful to hear, with no guarantee that I would believe her or that it would matter at all. That's the thing I've been sitting with for over a year now. Doing the right thing when it cost you nothing is easy. Doing it when it costs you something, your comfort, your certainty, the risk of being wrong or dismissed, that's the harder version. Virginia chose the harder version. She'd been watching those tire tracks for weeks, turning it over in her mind, and she still wasn't sure she'd seen enough to act. But she acted anyway, and everything that followed, the photographs, the inquiry, the conversation at my kitchen table that I had been avoiding for months, all of it traces back to one woman deciding that her discomfort mattered less than someone else's safety. I wish I could say I modeled that same clarity in how I handled Cody. I didn't. I saw things I should have questioned, and I chose not to question them because questioning them would have meant confronting something I wasn't ready to confront. That's not love, or rather, it is a kind of love, but it's the undisciplined kind. The kind that protects its own feelings at the expense of the other person's accountability. Real care, I've come to think, requires a certain willingness to see clearly, even when clarity is inconvenient. It requires you to use your head alongside your heart, not instead of it. $12,000 over 7 months. I managed budgets for a living. I caught discrepancies in purchase orders that other people missed. And I missed this, systematically for the better part of a year. That's not stupidity. But it is a failure of a particular kind of honesty with myself, the kind that asks not just what you want to believe, but what the evidence actually says. I know that now in a way I didn't know it before, and I carry it like something heavy that also, somehow, makes me steadier on my feet. The snow came back last week, first real accumulation of the season. I stood at my window and looked at it for a while before I did anything else, the way Virginia's father used to do on his farm in West Virginia, reading the ground before disturbing it. There's a kind of discipline in that, a refusal to rush. The world leaves traces of what it's been doing. If you're patient enough to look before you erase them, what I know is this. A woman with no obligation to me saw something, said something, and it changed the course of what happened next. And a small act of basic decency at a pharmacy counter, the kind that took 4 seconds and cost me $38, is the only reason she spoke to me at all. That's not magic. That's just how things connect when people choose to show up for each other. I'm still learning how to do that without flinching,